I won't ever forget the look on his face when the judge pressed play. The courtroom went silent, except for his voice, my husband's voice, laughing as he called me too stupid to notice what he'd been doing with our money. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this all started, 3 months before that family dinner, when I still believed I was married to a good man. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I was 47 years old, living in Phoenix, Arizona, in a house I thought we owned together. We'd been married 20 years of what I thought was partnership. I worked part-time at a bookstore downtown. Nothing glamorous, but I liked it. The smell of paper, the quiet conversations with customers. It was mine. Or at least, I thought I had something that was mine. Robert was a financial consultant. Numbers were his thing. He handled all our accounts, our investments, our retirement planning. I trusted him completely. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband. When you say vows, you don't think about the day you'll need to protect yourself from the person standing next to you at the altar. You don't think about keeping receipts like evidence. You don't imagine yourself one day sitting across from a lawyer trying to explain how you didn't notice your own signature being forged. The Phoenix heat that September was brutal, but nothing compared to what was coming. I remember the exact moment everything changed. I was looking for our property tax documents because we'd gotten a notice about a late payment. Robert was at a conference in San Diego, so I went into his home office. I never went in there. It was his space, and I respected that. Respected. That word tastes different now. The filing cabinet was locked, but I found the key in his desk drawer, tucked inside an old book. When I opened the second drawer, I saw folders I didn't recognize. One was labeled with my name. Just my name, not joint accounts or family documents. Just Margaret. Inside were papers, loan applications, a second mortgage on our house, a business partnership agreement, all with my signature. Except they weren't my signatures. They were close, I'll give him that. He'd practiced. But I've been signing my name for 47 years. I know the way I loop my G, the way I cross my T. These signatures were forgeries. My hands started shaking. I sat down on his leather chair, the one he'd insisted we needed to buy for $3,000 because image matters in my line of work. I held those papers and tried to make sense of what I was seeing. There was a date on the second mortgage, 18 months ago. We'd supposedly taken out $200,000 against our home equity. I never saw a penny of it. The air conditioning was running, but I felt cold. My fingers traced the forged signature on the mortgage document. The date stared back at me. March 2023. I tried to remember what we'd been doing in March of last year. Had there been any signs? Any clues I'd missed? I remembered. March was when Robert had taken that week-long trip to New York for a client meeting. He'd come back with expensive gifts, a designer handbag I'd never asked for, a new watch, reservations at the nicest restaurant in Phoenix. I'd thought he was being romantic, thoughtful. Now I understood. He was spending borrowed money, money taken out in my name. Guilt gifts purchased with stolen funds. I opened the next folder. Inside were bank statements for accounts I'd never heard of. An offshore account in the Cayman Islands, another in Singapore. The balances made my stomach turn. Not because they were high. They weren't. They'd been drained. Transfers out, thousands at a time, to accounts with numbers instead of names. I took pictures with my phone. My hands were shaking so badly the first few came out blurred. I had to steady my wrist against the desk, breathe deeply, try again. Click. Another forged signature. Click. Another secret account. Click. Another lie documented in crisp black and white. The afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, casting prison bar shadows across the documents spread on his desk. I thought about all the times I'd walked past this door, respecting his privacy, trusting his expertise. The door had never been locked to keep files safe. It had been locked to keep me out, to keep me ignorant. Have you ever had a moment where your entire reality just cracks? Where everything you thought was solid turns out to be smoke? I sat in that office for 2 hours. going through every file, every document. He'd been forging my signature for at least 3 years. Business deals, investment schemes, a loan to his brother for $80,000. All in my name, all without my knowledge. In one folder, I found emails printed out. Exchanges between Robert and his brother James about the $80,000 loan. "Don't worry," Robert had written. "Margaret doesn't look at any of this stuff. She trusts me completely. We're good." I read that line 3 times. Margaret doesn't look at any of this stuff. She trusts me completely. The casual confidence of it. The way he weaponized my trust. The way my love for him had been turned into a vulnerability he could exploit. There was another email, this one to a business partner I'd never met. "I can guarantee my wife's cooperation," Robert had written. "She doesn't involve herself in financial matters. I have full authority to act on her behalf." Full authority, like I was a child, like my legal rights were his to sign away. My phone buzzed. A text from Robert. "How's your day going? Don't forget we have dinner with the Mitchells on Friday." Such a normal message. Such a mundane check-in. I stared at it, trying to reconcile this casual husband with the man who'd been systematically defrauding me for years. I didn't respond. I couldn't. What would I say? "Great day. Just discovered you're a criminal." I set the phone down and went back to photographing documents. When he came home 2 days later, tanned and relaxed from his conference, I was sitting at the kitchen table with one of the documents in front of me. Just one. I wasn't ready to show my whole hand yet. Maybe I already knew, even then, that I'd need to be strategic. "What's this?" I asked, sliding the paper across the table. He barely glanced at it. "Oh, that. Yeah, I meant to tell you about that. It's an investment opportunity. I needed to move quickly, and you were at work, so I just went ahead and signed for both of us." His voice was so casual, like he was explaining why he'd ordered pizza instead of cooking dinner. No guilt, no hesitation, just matter-of-fact admission that he'd committed fraud. "That's not legal, Robert." He laughed. Actually laughed. The sound was light, dismissive, like I'd said something charmingly naive. "Come on, Maggie. We're married. What's yours is mine. What's mine is yours. Don't make a big deal out of it. You forged my signature. I expedited a process. There's a difference." He opened the refrigerator, pulled out a beer. The bottle cap hissed as he twisted it off. "You wouldn't have understood the financial details anyway. This is what I do for a living, remember?" And there it was, the casual dismissal I'd heard 1,000 times before, but never really heard until that moment. You wouldn't have understood. As if I were a child. As if my name on a legal document meant nothing because I didn't have his expertise. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw that beer bottle against the wall. Instead, I nodded. I said okay. I let him think I was backing down. Because something in me, some instinct I didn't know I had, whispered, "Be careful, pay attention. This is bigger than one document." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay next to him in our bed, listening to him breathe, and realized I was afraid. Not of violence. Robert had never hit me, never even raised his voice much. I was afraid of something more insidious. I was afraid of how much power I'd given away without even noticing. The ceiling fan rotated slowly above us, creating shifting shadows that looked like prison bars. I watched them move and thought about all the ways I'd confined myself. All the times I'd made myself smaller, quieter, more convenient. The fan blades cut through the air with a soft, whooshing sound, rhythmic and relentless, like the years I'd let slip away. Robert shifted in his sleep, throwing an arm across my waist. The weight of it felt different now, not comforting, possessive, claiming. I lay perfectly still, barely breathing, waiting for him to settle back into deep sleep so I could move away. For years, I'd let him handle everything financial. It started small, like most things do. He was better with numbers. He had the expertise. Why should both of us waste time balancing checkbooks and tracking investments? It made sense to divide the labor. I handled the house, the groceries, the social calendar. He handled the money. Except somewhere along the way, handling the money became controlling every single financial aspect of our lives, including forging my signature when he didn't want to bother getting my actual consent. I started making excuses for him in my head, which I know sounds insane now. But that's what you do when you love someone, isn't it? You find reasons. Maybe he really did think it was okay because we were married. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe if I'd paid more attention to our finances, he wouldn't have felt the need to do this behind my back. See what I did there? I made it my fault. I convinced myself that his criminal behavior was somehow a result of my inadequacy. That's what happens when you've spent years being told you don't understand. You're too emotional. You're making a big deal out of nothing. You start to believe it. You start to think maybe you really are the problem. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I'd never done that before unless I was actually sick, but I needed time to think. I sat at the kitchen table with coffee I didn't drink and tried to remember when I'd started shrinking myself. When had I stopped having opinions about our money? When had I stopped checking our bank statements? When had I become so passive in my own life? The coffee grew cold in my cup. I watched the cream separate, creating these swirling patterns that reminded me of fingerprints. Evidence. I was starting to think in terms of evidence. What did I know? What could I prove? What would hold up in court if it came to that? The thought scared me. Court, lawyers, divorce. These were words that happened to other people. Not to me, not to us. We'd been married 20 years. We had a nice house, nice things, a nice life. Didn't we? I thought about our wedding day, how young we'd been. I was 27. He was 30. I'd been working as a receptionist at a dental office, saving money to maybe go back to school. Robert was just starting his career in finance. Ambitious and confident. I liked that about him. I liked that he had plans, that he knew what he wanted. I'd spent my 20s drifting a bit, unsure of my direction. He seemed like an anchor. But anchors can become weights. And somewhere in those 20 years, I'd let myself sink. I thought about all the decisions I'd deferred to him. Where we lived, what car I drove, whether we'd have children. We didn't, by the way. He said kids would be a financial drain, and I convinced myself I was okay with that. Was I okay with that? I don't even know anymore. I stopped asking myself what I wanted so long ago that I'd forgotten how to answer the question. The sacrifice wasn't just about money, though the financial control was the visible part. The real sacrifice was my autonomy, my sense of self. I'd become an accessory to his life rather than the protagonist of my own. Every decision filtered through what he thought, what he wanted, what made sense to him. I couldn't remember the last time I'd done something just because I wanted to, without checking first if it fit into his vision of our life together. I used to paint. Did you know that? I had a whole setup in the garage when we first got married, canvases and oils, and this beautiful easel Robert bought me for our first anniversary. I haven't touched it in 15 years. He needed the garage space for his workshop, for tools he never used. I packed away my paints and told myself it was fine. I didn't have time for hobbies anyway. But the truth is, I had time. I just didn't have permission. Not explicit permission, nothing he said directly. Just the weight of his subtle disapproval. The way he'd sigh when I talked about taking an art class. The way he'd mention how expensive supplies were getting. I remembered the day I packed away the paints. It was a Saturday in June, hot and bright. Robert had come home with lumber and tools, announced he was building workbenches. My easel was in the way. Just for a few weeks, he'd said, just until I get set up. The easel never came back out. The workbench got built, but barely used. And I never said anything, never asked for my space back, never even acknowledged that I'd given it up. I just smiled and nodded and found other things to fill my time. Smaller things. Quieter things. Things that didn't require space or supplies or permission. Death by 1,000 cuts. That's what it was. Each one so small you barely notice, until one day you look down and you're bleeding out. I decided I needed to know the full extent of what he'd done. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a detective in my own life. I waited until he was at work, then spent hours in his office. I made copies of everything. Every forged signature, every secret account, every loan I never agreed to. I opened a separate email account and forwarded documents to myself. I took pictures with my phone. I was methodical, careful. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with the information, but I knew I needed it. Each day followed the same pattern. Robert would leave for work at 7:30. His goodbye kiss perfunctory and distracted. I'd wait 15 minutes, watching from the window to make sure his car was really gone. Then I'd go into his office. The first few times my heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. I kept listening for his car, jumping at every sound. But as the days went on, I became calmer, more focused. This was necessary. This was survival. I learned things about my husband I'd never known. He was meticulous in his record-keeping. I'll give him that. Every transaction documented, every lie carefully filed. It was like discovering a parallel universe where a stranger who looked like my husband had been living a completely different life. One afternoon, I found a leather-bound journal hidden at the back of the bottom drawer. At first, I thought maybe it was a diary. Maybe there'd be explanations, regrets, something human that would help me understand. But it wasn't a diary. It was a ledger, a careful accounting of every fraudulent transaction, written in his neat handwriting. Dates, amounts, purposes, all of it tracked like a business venture. There was an entry from 3 years ago. Second mortgage approved, $200K. M signed without hesitation. That's what he'd written, without hesitation. As if I'd been there. As if I'd willingly put my name on that document. The casual rewriting of reality was stunning. He'd told the lie so many times he'd started to believe it himself. Another entry, more recent. Crypto investment, $45K. High risk but necessary. M doesn't need to know about temporary cash flow issues. Temporary cash flow issues. That's what he called stealing from me. Temporary issues that had been going on for years. I sat on the floor of his office, surrounded by files and photographs and printed emails, and tried to understand who I'd been married to. The man who kissed me goodbye every morning and asked about my day at dinner. Was he even real? Or had that been a performance too? Another lie in a life built on lies? What I found made the first discovery look like nothing. He'd taken out loans totaling almost $400,000 using my credit. He'd invested in businesses that had failed, using our home as collateral. He'd given his brother money we didn't have, money he'd borrowed against our future. And all of it without telling me. All of it with my forged signature making me legally liable. The scale of it was breathtaking. Every few months, another loan, another investment, another transfer to his brother or a business partner I'd never met. The pattern was clear once I saw it all laid out. He'd been escalating. What started as small, unauthorized signatures had grown into systematic fraud, and I'd never noticed because he'd made sure I had no reason to look. There were investment schemes that read like scams, a ground floor opportunity in a cryptocurrency startup that had folded 3 months later, a guaranteed return real estate development in Nevada that turned out to be vacant desert, a can't-miss franchise opportunity that never materialized. Robert had fallen for every slick pitch, and he'd used my name to do it. I found a folder labeled MB, his brother's initials. Inside were loan agreements for $80,000. The terms were laughable. No interest, no payment schedule. Just a vague promise that James would pay it back when the settlement comes through. What settlement? I'd never heard anything about a settlement. There were emails between them, printed and filed. James thanking Robert for bailing him out again. Robert responding, "No problem, bro. That's what family is for. Just keep this between us. M doesn't need to know." M. He couldn't even type out my full name when he was conspiring to steal from me. We were broke. Worse than broke. We were drowning in debt I didn't even know existed. The comfortable middle-class life I thought we were living? It was a performance, a house of cards built on lies and my ignorance. I checked our actual bank statements, the ones for the accounts I knew about. We had maybe $3,000 total. $3,000. And I'd thought we were financially secure. I'd thought we were saving for retirement. I'd thought we were okay. The mortgage on our house, the one I'd believed was almost paid off? We owed more now than when we'd bought the place 15 years ago. The second mortgage, the one I'd never agreed to, had reset our equity to zero, and then some. We were underwater. If we sold, we'd still owe money. I should have confronted him immediately. I should have called a lawyer, filed charges, left. But I didn't. You want to know why? Because I was still making excuses. I was still thinking maybe there was an explanation. Maybe he was trying to protect me from stress. Maybe he was planning to fix it all before I found out. Maybe. The truth I didn't want to face was simpler. I was terrified of being alone. There I said it. After 20 years of marriage, the thought of starting over at 47 with no money and a destroyed credit score was paralyzing. Where would I go? How would I survive? I'd been a part-time bookstore clerk for 15 years. I hadn't built a career. I hadn't protected myself financially. I had nothing except a marriage that was turning out to be built on fraud. So I did what a lot of women do. I swallowed the truth and kept going. I went to work. I made dinner. I slept next to him. I pretended everything was normal while my insides were screaming. It was the sacrifice of my own reality, the sacrifice of being able to trust my own judgment. Every day was an act of self-betrayal, but I also kept gathering evidence. Every morning after he left, I'd go into his office. I'd photograph new documents, check for recent transactions, build my case even though I wasn't sure what I'd do with it. It became a ritual, a way to feel like I was doing something, even if I wasn't ready to do the big thing. During those 2 weeks of investigation, I started seeing Robert differently. Little things I'd always excused suddenly looked sinister. The way he'd insist on getting the mail before I could see it. The way he'd become irritated when I asked about our finances. The way he'd redirect conversations whenever money came up. These weren't personality quirks. They were tactics, control mechanisms designed to keep me in the dark. I remember one evening, maybe 5 days into my investigation, sitting across from him at dinner. He was telling me about his day, some story about a difficult client. He was animated, gesturing with his fork, making me laugh at his impression of the client's accent. In that moment, he seemed so normal, so like the man I'd married, and I thought, how do you do it? How do you sit here and lie to my face while you're bankrupting us? How do you sleep at night? But I didn't ask. I smiled and laughed at his stories and cleared the plates. And then I went back to his office the next morning and found more evidence of his crimes. The duality was exhausting. Playing the loving wife while knowing the truth, pretending everything was fine while documenting his fraud. I felt like I was living in 2 realities at once. The surface reality, where we were a normal married couple, and the hidden reality, where I was gathering evidence against a criminal who happened to share my bed. Then came the family dinner, our monthly tradition. Robert's parents, his brother James and his wife, his sister Katie, all gathered at our house. I'd spent the day cooking, as always. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans the way his mother liked them. I set the table with the good china, the stuff we'd gotten as wedding gifts and barely used. That morning, I'd woken up with a strange clarity. Today was going to be different. I didn't know how yet, but I felt it in my bones. The pretending was over. Something had to give. I moved through the house, preparing for guests, and everything felt surreal. I was peeling potatoes and thinking about fraud. I was setting the table and thinking about forgery. I was arranging flowers in a vase and thinking about how my entire life was a lie. I didn't know what I was going to do when I put my phone on the bookshelf, camera facing the dining room, recording app running. I think part of me hoped he'd confess. That maybe with his family there, he'd feel some shame about what he'd done. That someone would ask the right question and the truth would come out, and I wouldn't have to be the villain who exposed him. I positioned the phone carefully behind a stack of books, lens peeking out just enough to capture the table. I tested the angle twice, making sure everyone would be in frame. My hands were steady. I felt calm in a way I hadn't felt in weeks. This was it. Whatever happened next, I'd have proof. I'd have evidence of who these people really were. Instead, what happened was worse than I could have imagined. Dinner started normally enough. Small talk about James's job, Katie's kids. Robert poured wine, played the generous host. I served food, played the dutiful wife. Then his mother mentioned something about retirement planning, and Robert launched into one of his financial lectures. He loved doing this, performing his expertise for an audience. The key is diversification, he was saying. You can't put all your eggs in one basket. That's what I always tell my clients. Multiple income streams, strategic investments. The irony was almost funny. Here he was, lecturing about financial responsibility while sitting on $400,000 in secret debt. But his parents were nodding along, impressed as always by their successful son. "Is that what you and Margaret do?" his mother asked. Robert smiled. That smile I'd once found charming. Now it just looked smug. "Well, I handle our portfolio. Maggie's not really interested in the details. Are you, sweetheart?" Everyone looked at me. I forced a smile. I trust Robert's judgment. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. But what else could I say? Not yet. Not without a plan. "Smart woman," his father said. "A man should handle the finances. That's his job." Katie laughed. "Dad, it's not the 1950s. No, he's right," Robert said. "I mean, not because Margaret's a woman, just because it's my profession. It would be like me trying to reorganize the bookstore. Everyone should stick to what they're good at." There it was again, the casual dismissal, the reduction of my intelligence to something that could manage shelving books, but nothing more complex. "What is Margaret good at?" James asked. He'd had too much wine already. He always did. There was a pause. Robert took a sip of his drink. I watched him consider his answer, watched him decide to go for the laugh. "She makes a mean pot roast." They laughed, all of them, like it was a joke, like reducing me to a pot roast after 20 years was funny. I felt something inside me crack, not break, exactly. More like the final crack in ice that's been weakening for months, the moment before it all gives way. "No, seriously," Katie said, wiping her eyes. "What does Margaret do? Besides work part-time at that bookstore?" "She keeps the house running," Robert said, gesturing around with his wine glass. "Takes care of things so I can focus on work. It's a partnership. A partnership where one partner brings in the money and the other partner spends it," James said. More laughter. Robert's mother joined in. "Well, someone has to make the money and someone has to spend it. That's marriage." I stood up, started clearing plates even though people weren't done eating. I needed to move. Needed to do something with my hands before I threw my wine glass at the wall. "Maggie's sensitive about this stuff," Robert said quietly, but not so quietly I couldn't hear. The room went quieter, everyone leaning in to hear his confidential tone. "She feels bad that she doesn't contribute financially." I stopped, turned around. "I contribute." "Of course you do, sweetheart. I didn't mean it that way." "How did you mean it?" The table went quiet. Robert's smile tightened. I could see him recalculating, trying to figure out if this was a real challenge or something he could smooth over. "We don't need to do this now." "Do what?" "Make everything about you. We're having a nice family dinner." His mother reached over and patted my hand. Her touch felt cold. Reptilian. "Honey, he's just saying that you're lucky to have a husband who takes care of the money stuff. My generation understood that. Your generation wants to make everything a battle." I pulled my hand away. The words came out before I could stop them, before I could think about consequences. "Robert forged my signature on loan documents. Did you know that?" More silence. But this time, it was different. This time, I'd said something that couldn't be laughed away. "Maggie?" Robert said, his voice low, warning. I could see his jaw tightening, see the muscle jumping in his temple. He was angry now. Good. He took out hundreds of thousands of dollars in loans without telling me, used my credit, signed my name. That's fraud, technically. Did you know that? Robert stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. You're being dramatic. I explained this already. We're married. I don't need your permission for every financial decision. Actually, you do. Legally, you do. James started to say something, but Katie put a hand on his arm. For once, she was reading the room correctly. This wasn't dinner conversation anymore. This was a confrontation. This is inappropriate, his mother said, her voice sharp. This is family dinner, not the time to air your marital problems. When is the right time? I asked. I looked at her directly, held her gaze. When he's bankrupted us? When we lose the house? When should I bring up that my husband is a liar and a thief? Robert's face went red. You need to stop talking. Right now. Or what? The question hung in the air. Everyone was frozen, watching us. Katie's mouth was slightly open. James was gripping his wine glass. Robert's parents looked horrified. Or you're going to regret it. There it was, the threat underneath all those years of gentle condescension. The real him, finally visible. I already regret it, I said. My voice was steady now, calm. I regret trusting you. I regret giving up my autonomy. I regret 20 years of making myself smaller so you could feel bigger. I left the room, left them all sitting there. Went upstairs to our bedroom and locked the door. I could hear them downstairs, their voices rising and falling. I couldn't make out words, but I could guess. They were talking about me, about how I'd embarrassed Robert, about how I was being unreasonable, about how I didn't understand the complexities of finance. Let them talk. I had the recording, every word of that dinner captured, evidence of his casual cruelty, his dismissal, his family's enabling. It wasn't proof of the forgery, but it was proof of the dynamic. Proof that I wasn't crazy or oversensitive or dramatic. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the murmur of voices below. Someone was leaving. I heard the front door open and close, then again. They were all going, probably scandalized, probably on Robert's side. I didn't care. For the first time in 20 years, I genuinely didn't care what they thought of me. After about 20 minutes, I heard Robert's heavy footsteps on the stairs. I braced myself, but he didn't try the locked bedroom door. I heard him go into the guest room instead. Good. I didn't want to see him. Didn't want to perform the ritual of making up, of smoothing things over, of pretending my anger wasn't justified. I pulled out my phone and checked the recording. 12 minutes and 43 seconds. Clear audio. I could hear every laugh, every dismissive comment, every moment of casual cruelty. I backed it up to my new email account, then uploaded it to a cloud storage service. Then I backed it up again to a USB drive I kept hidden in my underwear drawer. Evidence. This was evidence, not of the fraud itself, but of who Robert really was when he felt safe, when he thought I couldn't fight back. I lay in bed that night, door still locked, and felt something shift inside me. The fear was still there. The uncertainty about the future, the terror of being alone and broke at 47. But underneath it, something harder, something stronger. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind. The cold, calculating kind. The kind that says, you made a mistake underestimating me. I didn't know yet that this recording would end up in court. I didn't know that 3 months later, a judge would listen to my husband laugh about keeping me in the dark. I didn't know that justice was actually possible. That night, all I knew was that I'd finally stopped making excuses. And I knew something else. I was done. Done making myself small. Done accepting his version of reality. Done sacrificing myself for a marriage that had never been what I thought it was. The next morning, Robert left for work without speaking to me. Fine. I called my friend Susan, someone I'd known since before my marriage. We'd drifted apart over the years. My fault. I'd let Robert's subtle criticisms of my friends create distance. But Susan answered on the first ring, and when I asked if we could meet for coffee, she said yes without hesitation. We met at a cafe downtown, one I'd never been to with Robert. Neutral territory, safe ground. Susan hugged me tight when she saw me, and I realized how much I'd missed that. Simple physical affection from someone who actually cared about me. She ordered us coffee and pastries I didn't touch, and then she just waited. She didn't push or pry, just gave me space to begin. I told her everything, the forgeries, the debt, the family dinner. I showed her the documents on my phone, played parts of the recording. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she didn't tell me I was overreacting. She didn't suggest couples therapy or communication strategies. She gave me the number of a lawyer. "This is Patricia Chen," Susan said, writing the number on a napkin. "She helped my cousin through a bad divorce 2 years ago. She's tough, she's smart, and she doesn't back down." I don't know if I can afford a lawyer. Susan reached across the table and took my hand. "Most will do a free consultation. And Margaret, you can't afford not to get one. What Robert did, that's not just a bad husband move. That's criminal. You need protection." The word hit me hard. Protection. From my husband, from the man I'd loved and trusted for 20 years, the man I'd built a life with. But Susan was right. I needed protection from him now. "You need legal advice," she said. "Today, right now. Don't wait." "I don't have money for a lawyer. Most will do a free consultation. Just call. Promise me you'll call." I promised, and I did. That afternoon, I sat in a law office downtown, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and explained my situation to a woman named Patricia Chen. She was maybe 60, with silver hair and sharp eyes. She took notes while I talked. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me directly. "Margaret, what your husband did is multiple counts of fraud, forgery, identity theft. You could press criminal charges. You could sue for divorce and financial damages. But first, we need to protect you." "Protect me how?" "Legally separate your finances. File a police report. Get a forensic accountant to trace where the money went. Build a case." She paused. "Are you prepared to end your marriage?" Was I? I'd been asking myself that question for weeks. The answer should have been obvious. But 20 years is a long time. Walking away from 20 years, even 20 bad years, felt like admitting defeat. It felt like failure. Then I thought about that recording, about Robert's laugh when his brother called me a spender, about the way he'd threatened me when I finally stood up for myself, about 20 years of making myself small and quiet and convenient. "Yes," I said. "I'm prepared." Patricia nodded. "Then let's get started." The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and phone calls. I filed a police report. The officer who took my statement looked bored until I showed him the documents, and then his expression changed. "Ma'am, this is serious fraud. You understand that, right? Your husband could face criminal charges." Did I understand? I was starting to. I was starting to understand that what had happened to me wasn't just a bad marriage, it was a crime. Robert had committed crimes against me, and he'd done it casually, easily, like it was his right. The officer, Detective Martinez, spent 2 hours going through everything I'd brought. He photographed documents, made copies, asked detailed questions about dates and amounts. "This is one of the most thorough evidence collections I've seen from a victim," he said. "Most people come in with suspicions. You came in with a case." I didn't tell him that I'd spent 2 weeks gathering that evidence while sleeping next to the man who'd victimized me. Didn't tell him about the fear and the pretending and the constant vigilance. Just nodded and signed the complaint. The forensic accountant Patricia hired found even more than I'd discovered. Offshore accounts, hidden assets, a pattern of fraud going back almost to the beginning of our marriage. Robert had been stealing from me, from us, for nearly 2 decades. He'd built an entire financial life I knew nothing about. Her name was Jennifer Kim, and she had the kind of mind that could look at a spreadsheet and see a story. She laid it all out for me in her office, charts and timelines color-coded and cross-referenced. "Your husband is sophisticated in his methods," she said. "This isn't opportunistic fraud. This is systematic, planned, long-term financial abuse. She showed me how he'd started small. A credit card in my name that I didn't know about, opened in our second year of marriage. Small charges, paid off immediately. Building my credit, making sure I had a high score for when he'd need it later. Then a personal loan, just $5,000. Then another. Each one a test, each one teaching him what he could get away with. By the time he took out the second mortgage, Jennifer said, pointing to a spike in her timeline, he'd been forging your signature for 11 years. He had it perfected. And he knew that you weren't checking, weren't monitoring, weren't questioning. The systematic nature of it was somehow worse than the amount. This wasn't a desperate man making bad decisions. This was a calculated predator grooming his victim. And I'd been so easy, so trusting, so perfectly groomed. When confronted with the evidence, he tried to spin it. Said he was protecting me. Said the offshore accounts were for our retirement, that he was planning to surprise me. Said I was too unsophisticated to understand international finance. He actually used that word, unsophisticated. We met in Patricia's office for what she called a settlement discussion. Robert brought his own lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit who kept calling me Mrs. Morrison like we were strangers. Robert wouldn't look at me, just kept his eyes on the table or on his lawyer. Patricia laid out the evidence, the forgeries, the hidden accounts, the documented pattern of fraud. Robert's lawyer tried to interrupt, but she talked over him. We have signed statements from handwriting experts. We have forensic accounting showing the money trail. We have recordings of your client admitting to signing documents without his wife's knowledge or consent. That's when Robert finally looked at me. His eyes were hard, angry, not sorry, not ashamed, angry that I'd caught him. You recorded our family dinner? I recorded myself being publicly humiliated, I said, and you admitting to fraud. Patricia shut him down fast. Save it for the judge, she said. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Robert fought every step. Tried to claim I was mentally unstable, that I'd known about everything and was now having regrets. His lawyer painted me as a gold digger who'd lived off Robert's success and was now trying to cash out. In one deposition, Robert's lawyer asked me, "Isn't it true that you enjoyed the lifestyle my client provided? The nice house, the nice car, the vacations?" I looked at him. What vacations? What nice car? I drive a 12-year-old Honda. We haven't taken a real vacation in 8 years. The lifestyle I was supposedly enjoying was a mirage built on debt my husband took out in my name. They tried to claim I was vengeful, that I'd manufactured evidence out of spite. They tried to say the signatures were close enough that I might have signed the documents and forgotten. They tried everything. But we had the documents, we had the recordings, we had expert testimony about the forgeries, and eventually we had our day in court. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, that stale smell of recycled air and old carpet. I sat at a table with Patricia, Robert at another table with his lawyer. A handful of people in the gallery, Susan, a few friends from my church group, a reporter from the local paper who'd gotten wind of the case. The judge was a woman in her 60s, Judge Martha Sullivan. She had a reputation for being fair, but tough. She listened to opening statements without expression, then asked to see the evidence. Patricia presented the documents first. Each forgery projected on a screen, my real signature next to it for comparison. The differences were subtle but clear once you knew to look. The handwriting expert testified, pointing out the tells. The way Robert had practiced the loops but couldn't quite match the pressure of my pen strokes. Then came the financial records. Jennifer walked the judge through the timeline, the pattern, the systematic escalation. The judge took notes, asked pointed questions about specific transactions. That's where this story started, remember? With the judge pressing play. With Robert's voice filling the courtroom, laughing about keeping me stupid. With his face going pale as he realized that the wife he'd underestimated had been 3 steps ahead. The recording played for 12 minutes. The judge listened to all of it. Robert's casual cruelty, his family's enabling laughter, my confrontation, his threat. When it finished, Judge Sullivan sat back in her chair. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "I've been on the bench for 32 years. I've seen a lot of financial fraud. but I've rarely seen such a clear picture of the contempt an abuser has for his victim. This recording, combined with the documentary evidence, paints a disturbing portrait of systematic financial abuse and manipulation. Robert's lawyer tried to object, tried to say the recording was taken without consent, but Patricia had already filed a motion establishing that Arizona is a one-party consent state. I was allowed to record my own conversations. The judge didn't find my recording funny. Neither did the prosecutor, who'd been building a criminal case in parallel to the divorce. Financial fraud, identity theft, forgery, the charges stacked up. Robert's lawyer tried to negotiate, tried to make deals, but Patricia was relentless. "Your client committed crimes," she told them in a meeting in the courthouse hallway. "Crimes with evidence, recordings, documents, forensic accounting. You can take a plea, or we can go to trial and let a jury decide. Your choice." I watched Robert's face as his lawyer explained his options. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. The confidence that had always surrounded him like armor was gone. He was just a man in an expensive suit who'd made very bad choices. They took the plea. Robert got 3 years in prison, though he'd probably serve 18 months with good behavior. He lost his financial planning license, lost his credibility in the community, lost his family's unconditional support when they realized the extent of what he'd done. The day of sentencing, I sat in the courtroom gallery and watched him stand before the judge. He looked diminished in his prison jumpsuit, not the tailored suits he used to wear. Judge Sullivan read out the sentence, and Robert's shoulders slumped. For a moment, I felt something that might have been pity. This was the man I'd shared 20 years with, after all. The man who'd bought me that easel for our first anniversary, back when he still pretended to care about my happiness. But then I remembered the ledger, the careful accounting of his lies, the casual way he'd written about forging my signature, the contempt in his voice at that family dinner. The pity evaporated. This was justice. Incomplete, perhaps. Insufficient, maybe. But justice nonetheless. His mother called me once after the sentencing. "You didn't have to destroy him," she said. "You could have handled this privately. You could have protected the family name." "He destroyed himself," I told her. "And I'm not part of your family anymore. I don't have to protect anything. We gave you a good life. Robert gave you everything." The audacity of it took my breath away. He stole from me. He forged my signature. He committed fraud using my identity. That's not giving me everything. That's taking everything. You're vindictive. You always were ungrateful. I hung up on her. Actually hung up, something I'd never had the courage to do before. The phone rang again immediately, but I didn't answer. I blocked the number. Blocked all their numbers. I was done being the good daughter-in-law, the accommodating wife, the woman who made herself smaller to make them comfortable. She hung up without saying goodbye. I never heard from any of them again. And I was okay with that. Better than okay. Relieved. The civil case took longer, but we won that too. I got the house, what was left of our legitimate assets, and a judgment against him for damages. I wouldn't see most of that money, probably. You can't get blood from a stone. But the principle mattered. Through all of this, I wasn't alone. Susan became my anchor. She came to every court appearance, every lawyer meeting. She reminded me to eat when I forgot. She let me cry on her couch when the weight of it all felt too heavy. "I can't believe I didn't see it sooner," I said one night, 3 glasses of wine deep, tears streaming down my face. "He didn't want you to see it," Susan said. "That was the whole point. You're not stupid for missing something someone deliberately hid from you." And then there was my church group. I'd started attending services again after years of making excuses about being too busy. The community there, they saw what was happening and they rallied. They brought meals, offered prayers, sat with me during the dark nights when I wondered if I was doing the right thing. One woman, Eleanor, told me her story. How her husband had drained their accounts and left her penniless at 60. How she'd rebuilt, how she'd survived. "You're not alone," she said, "and you're not the first. That's the terrible truth. But you can be one of the ones who fights back. Research indicates the average timeshare scam victim loses $10,000 before realizing the fraud. I'd lost hundreds of thousands before I woke up, but at least I did wake up. At least I fought back. The trap I set at that family dinner wasn't calculated revenge. It was survival instinct. Some part of me knew I needed evidence, needed proof that I wasn't crazy or oversensitive. That recording became the cornerstone of my case, not because it showed the fraud directly, but because it showed the pattern, the dismissal, the contempt, the casual cruelty. It showed who Robert really was when he thought I couldn't fight back. Confronting him in court, with his own words played back, was the moment I finally felt powerful again. Not vindictive, not cruel, powerful. I'd taken back my narrative. I'd refused to be the punchline of his jokes anymore. I remember sitting in the courtroom after the verdict, watching Robert be led away by court officers. He didn't look back at me, not once, and I realized I didn't need him to. I didn't need an apology or an explanation or acknowledgement. I needed him gone. And now he was. Studies reveal that elder abuse forensic centers increase prosecutions by 90 times. I learned that statistic from one of the victim advocates who worked on my case. 90 times. When you have the right support, the right resources, the system can work. It doesn't always. I know that. I'm lucky in ways many women aren't. I had documentation. I had help. I had a prosecutor who cared. But even with all that, justice felt incomplete. Robert would serve his time and get out. He'd rebuild his life eventually. Men like him always do. Meanwhile, I was 47, divorced, rebuilding my credit and my sense of self from scratch. Was it fair? I don't know. Justice in court isn't the same as justice in your soul. The legal system gave me vindication, but it couldn't give me back those 20 years. It couldn't undo the ways I'd diminished myself. That work, the real work of healing, was mine alone. I started therapy, real therapy, with a woman who specialized in financial abuse and coercive control. She helped me understand that what happened wasn't my fault, that making excuses for Robert's behavior was a survival mechanism, not a character flaw, that I could forgive myself for not seeing it sooner. You saw it when you were ready to see it, she told me. That's how it works. If you'd seen it sooner, you might not have survived it. Your mind protected you until you were strong enough to face the truth. I don't know if I believe that completely. Part of me still thinks I should have known, should have been smarter, more aware. But I'm working on it, working on being gentle with myself, working on understanding that I was a victim of deliberate manipulation, not a fool. Dr. Sarah Chen, my therapist, had a gentle way of reframing things. In one session, I was beating myself up about the paints. I gave up painting for nothing, I said, for tools he never even used. How stupid was I? You made a reasonable compromise based on false information, she said. He told you it would be temporary. He told you he needed the space. You trusted your partner. That's not stupid. That's what you're supposed to do in a healthy relationship. But we weren't in a healthy relationship. You didn't know that then, and he made sure you wouldn't know. That's what makes it abuse, Margaret. You can't blame yourself for not seeing through something that was deliberately designed to be invisible. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I quit the bookstore. Not because I didn't like it, but because I needed something more, something that felt like building rather than surviving. I enrolled in a financial literacy program at the community college, me taking finance classes. The irony isn't lost on me. But I wanted to understand. I wanted to never again be in a position where someone could bamboozle me with jargon and complexity. I wanted to be able to read a loan document, understand an investment prospectus, know my rights. The classes were hard. I was older than most of the other students, and I felt stupid a lot of the time. But I kept going. And slowly, It started to make sense. The vocabulary, the concepts, the systems that had seemed so opaque when Robert was explaining them. Turned out, they weren't that complicated after all. He just wanted me to think they were. My instructor, Professor Davis, was a patient man in his 50s who'd worked in banking for decades before teaching. He noticed me struggling with compound interest calculations and stayed after class to help. "You're doing fine," he said. "Better than fine. You're asking good questions." I feel like everyone else already knows this stuff. Most of them grew up with parents who talked about money. You're learning it now, which is harder but more meaningful. You chose this. That matters. I also started volunteering with a local organization that helps women escape financial abuse. I share my story. I help others recognize the warning signs. I explain what forgery looks like, how to protect your credit, how to document abuse. I tell them they're not crazy, they're not stupid, they're not alone. The first time I spoke at a support group meeting, my hands shook so badly I could barely hold my notes. There were maybe 15 women in the room, all ages, all backgrounds. I told them about the filing cabinet, the forged signatures, the family dinner recording. I told them about being afraid and making excuses, and finally finding the courage to fight back. When I finished, a young woman in the back raised her hand. She couldn't have been more than 30, but her eyes looked older, tired. "How did you know when it was time to leave?" she asked. "I didn't," I said honestly. "I just knew I couldn't keep pretending anymore, and that was enough." An older woman, maybe in her 60s, spoke up. "What if you can't afford to leave? What if you don't have money saved?" "I didn't have money," I said. "I had debt I didn't even know about. My credit was destroyed. I had a part-time job that barely paid anything, but I had documentation. I had evidence. And once I had that, I found people who would help. Lawyers who worked on contingency. Organizations that provided support. You don't need money to start. You need proof and courage." Another woman asked how I dealt with the fear, the loneliness, the nights when I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. I told her the truth. Some days, I still wondered. Some days, I still felt the fear. But it was better than the alternative. It was better than spending another 20 years making myself invisible. After the meeting, several women came up to talk privately. They showed me bank statements, told me about mysterious debts, described patterns of control I recognized intimately. I gave them Patricia's number. I explained how to check credit reports, how to document financial abuse, how to gather evidence safely. This has become my legacy. Turning the worst experience of my life into something that might help others. It doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't make the pain worth it, but it gives it meaning. It gives me purpose. One woman, Maria, stayed in touch. She was in her early 40s, married 15 years, with 2 kids. Her husband had been controlling their finances the whole time, and she'd only recently discovered he'd taken out credit cards in her name. We met for coffee once a week, and I walked her through the process I'd gone through. Finding a lawyer, filing reports, building a case, protecting herself and her children. 6 months later, I sat with her in court for her divorce hearing. She won. Full custody, division of assets, protection from the debts he'd fraudulently created. Afterward, she hugged me and cried. "I couldn't have done this without you," she said. But she could have. She did. I just showed her it was possible. That survival was an option. That women like us don't have to accept lives built on someone else's lies. I thought about writing to Robert in prison. I drafted the letter a dozen times. Sometimes it was angry, full of everything I wished I'd said but didn't. Sometimes it was sad, mourning what I'd thought we had. Sometimes it was just questions. Did you ever love me? When did I become the enemy? Was any of it real? I never sent the letters. What would be the point? He'd just lie, or justify, or turn it back on me somehow. The truth is, I don't need his answers anymore. I don't need his apology or his explanation. I don't need anything from him at all. That realization was its own kind of freedom. For 20 years, I'd oriented my entire life around Robert. His needs, his opinions, his approval. Now, suddenly, I didn't have to consider him at all. What did I want for dinner? Whatever I felt like. What did I want to watch on TV? Anything that interested me. What did I want to do with my Saturday? Whatever brought me joy. It sounds simple, maybe even trivial. But after 2 decades of checking every decision against someone else's preferences, the ability to just choose felt revolutionary. I painted again. I set up an easel in the garage, in the space where Robert's unused tools had been. I bought new paints, new canvases. My technique was rusty, but it came back. The feel of the brush, the smell of the oils, the way color can capture emotion better than words sometimes. I'd forgotten how much I loved it, how much of myself I'd packed away with those paints 15 years ago. My first painting was of a woman's hands breaking free from chains. Subtle, right? But it felt true. It felt like my story. I hung it in my bedroom, where I see it every morning when I wake up, a reminder that I saved myself, that I found the strength to fight back. The house is different now. I repainted the walls colors Robert would have hated. Bright yellows, deep blues, rich greens. I got rid of furniture that felt like him, replaced it with things that felt like me. I adopted a cat, something he'd never allowed. I filled the space with life and color and noise. I made it mine. The cat, a orange tabby I named Phoenix after my city, likes to sit on my lap while I paint. He purrs like a motor and sometimes bats at my brushes. I never knew how much I needed that simple companionship, that uncomplicated affection from a creature who asks nothing more than food and warmth and occasional attention. My relationship with his family ended with the divorce, which was fine. They'd shown me who they were at that dinner table. People who would laugh at cruelty as long as they weren't the target. People who valued appearances over truth. I don't need that energy in my life. But I reconnected with my own family. My sister, who I'd barely spoken to in years because Robert found her annoying. My mother, who I'd kept at arm's length because Robert thought she was too opinionated. They welcomed me back without judgment, without "I told you so." Just love and support and the relief of being around people who genuinely cared about my well-being. "I missed you," my sister said the first time we met for lunch after the divorce. "I always missed you, even when you were right there. It was like Robert had built this wall around you." "He did," I said, "and I helped him build it. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Just stay this time. Stay present." Time did its work. The sharp edges of anger dulled into something more manageable. The constant anxiety faded. I started sleeping through the night again. Started eating meals because I was hungry, not because I needed to keep up appearances. Started existing in my body without the constant tension of performance. I dated a little, though nothing serious. Honestly, I'm not sure I'm ready for serious. Maybe I never will be again, and that's okay too. I've learned that being alone isn't the same as being lonely. That independence isn't something to fear, but something to celebrate. People ask me if I'm happy now. It's a complicated question. Am I happier than I was in the marriage? Absolutely. Am I where I want to be? Not yet. But I'm moving toward it. I'm building a life that's authentically mine, not a performance for someone else's approval. Some days are harder than others. I still have moments where I doubt myself, where I wonder if I overreacted or could have handled things differently. Those voices Robert planted in my head, they don't disappear overnight, but they're getting quieter. And I'm getting better at recognizing them for what they are. His voice, not mine. His judgments, not truth. I keep the court transcripts in a box in my closet. I haven't looked at them in months, but knowing they're there helps somehow. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that what happened was real and documented and adjudicated. On the hard days, when I start to doubt, I can pull out that box and remind myself that a judge, a jury, the legal system itself validated my reality. The educational piece of this, the part I want you to really hear, is about why victims stay in these situations. It's the question everyone asks, right? Why didn't she just leave? Why did it take her so long to see what was happening? If you've never been in a relationship with a manipulator, these questions might seem reasonable. But they fundamentally misunderstand how coercive control works. Manipulation doesn't happen all at once. It's not like someone shows up on the first date and says, "Hi, I'm going to financially abuse you and destroy your sense of self." It's incremental. A suggestion here, a criticism there. Small boundary violations that you excuse because you love them, because everyone makes mistakes, because you want to believe in the good. Before I learned better, I thought I blamed myself because I was weak or stupid. But that's not it. I blamed myself because Robert systematically taught me to blame myself. Every time I questioned something, he'd turn it around, make it about my insecurity, my lack of understanding, my oversensitivity. Over time, that rewires your brain. You stop trusting your own perceptions. You stop believing you have the right to question or demand answers. The cycle of abuse includes a phase called love bombing, where the abuser is incredibly attentive and affectionate. For me, that would happen after I discovered something concerning. Robert would bring home flowers, plan a date night, be extra sweet and considerate. My nervous system would relax. See, I'd think, he does love me. I was overreacting. This is who he really is. But the love bombing was just another manipulation tactic. It kept me off balance, never quite sure which version of Robert was real. It made the good times feel precious, and the bad times feel like anomalies I needed to forgive. Financial abuse specifically creates a kind of learned helplessness. When someone else controls all the money, all the resources, all the information about your economic life, you become dependent. Even if you're working, even if you're contributing, if you don't have access or knowledge or control, you're vulnerable. And abusers know this. They cultivate this vulnerability deliberately. Studies show that economic abuse occurs in 99% of domestic violence cases. 99%. It's not a side effect. It's a deliberate strategy to trap victims, make them financially dependent and they can't leave, make them financially ignorant and they can't protect themselves, make them financially liable through forgery and fraud, and they're implicated in the crimes against them. Robert didn't just steal money. He stole my autonomy, my confidence, my sense of reality. He made me doubt myself so thoroughly that even when I had evidence of his crimes in my hands, I still questioned whether I was overreacting. If you're reading this and something feels familiar, trust that feeling. Trust yourself. I know it's scary. I know you've been taught not to trust yourself, to defer to your partner's expertise or judgment or authority. But your instincts are trying to protect you. Listen to them. Start by documenting everything. Every financial transaction you can access. Every time you're made to feel stupid or crazy. Every promise that gets broken. Every explanation that doesn't quite make sense. Write it down, date it, keep it somewhere safe. You might need that evidence later. Check your credit report. You're entitled to a free report once a year from each of the 3 major bureaus. Look for accounts you don't recognize, loans you didn't apply for, inquiries you didn't authorize. If something looks wrong, it probably is. Open your own bank account if you don't have one. Even if it's just a savings account with $50, have something that's yours alone, that no one else can access. Start building your safety net, even if it's small. Talk to someone you trust. A friend, a family member, a therapist, a domestic violence hotline. Break the isolation. Abusers thrive on keeping their victims isolated and silent. Speaking your truth to someone who believes you can be revolutionary. And if you're staying right now because you're not ready to leave, that's okay. I'm not here to judge that. Leaving is dangerous. Leaving requires resources and planning and support. What matters is that you start seeing the situation clearly. Start recognizing the manipulation for what it is. Start protecting yourself in whatever ways you can. You're not stupid for staying. You're not weak for making excuses. You're surviving a deliberate campaign to control you. And surviving is hard and brave and worth acknowledging. When you're ready, when it's safe, there are resources. Lawyers who do pro bono domestic violence work, organizations that help with financial abuse, shelters that provide safety, therapists who understand trauma. You don't have to do this alone. My story had a relatively happy ending because I had privileges many victims don't have. I had documentation. I had legal representation. I had a prosecutor who took my case seriously. I had friends and community support. I'm white, educated, middle class. The system worked for me in ways it doesn't work for everyone. But even with all those advantages, it took me 20 years to leave. 20 years of escalating financial abuse before I finally said enough. There's no timeline that's too long. There's no threshold of suffering you need to reach before your pain is valid. If it hurts, if it feels wrong, if you're afraid, those are enough reasons to seek help. The other thing I want you to understand is that healing isn't linear. 2 years after my divorce, I still have moments of grief for the marriage I thought I had. I still have dreams where Robert and I are happy, and I wake up confused and sad. I still sometimes catch myself about to ask his opinion before I remember I don't need his opinion anymore. Trauma lives in your body, not just your mind. I did EMDR therapy to process the worst of it, the moments of discovery and confrontation and fear. It helped, but it didn't erase anything. The memories are still there. I've just learned to carry them differently. I also learned about complex PTSD, which is what happens when you experience ongoing trauma rather than a single incident. The hypervigilance, the emotional flashbacks, the difficulty trusting anyone, the constant scanning for danger. These are normal responses to abnormal situations. They don't mean you're broken. They mean your nervous system is trying to protect you from being hurt again. Be patient with yourself if you're healing from something like this. Recovery takes time. It takes support. It takes learning to trust yourself again. It takes grieving not just the relationship that ended, but the relationship you thought you had. The future you planned. The person you thought your partner was. All of that is loss, and loss requires mourning. But on the other side of that grief, there's possibility. There's freedom. There's the chance to build a life that's actually yours. Not a compromise, not a performance, not a slow diminishment. Yours. I'm living that life now. It's smaller in some ways than what I had before. My house is smaller, my income is smaller, my social circle is smaller, but it's richer, truer, mine. I wake up in the morning and make choices all day long that are only about what I want and need. I paint when I feel like it. I eat cereal for dinner, if that sounds good. I go to bed early or stay up late based on my own rhythms. I spend money on things that matter to me without justifying or explaining. I exist without constant evaluation and judgment. This might sound like a small thing, but it's everything. It's the difference between surviving and living, between existing in someone else's shadow and standing in your own light. So that's my story. The family dinner was just one moment, one piece of evidence in a much larger pattern. But it was the moment I stopped pretending. The moment I started fighting back. The moment I decided that my truth mattered more than keeping the peace. Thank you for staying with me through all of this. I know it's long. I know it's heavy. But if even one person reading this recognizes themselves in my story and decides to get help, it was worth telling. I want to hear from you. What city are you in right now? What time is it where you are? Did anything in this story resonate with you? Have you experienced financial abuse or manipulation? What helped you get through it? If this story connected with you, please hit the like button. It helps more people find these stories, and maybe someone who needs to hear it will see it. And please, share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in my place? Do you think the justice I got was enough? Should I have handled things differently? I read every comment and I learned from your perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this. Real stories about real women finding their strength and rebuilding their lives. stories about survival and recovery and the complicated path to healing. I'll link 2 related videos in the description. One is about recognizing financial abuse early, and the other is about rebuilding your credit after fraud. Both might be helpful if you're going through something similar. Until the next story, take care of your heart, guard it fiercely, trust yourself, and remember that it's never too late to reclaim your life. You deserve to be free. You deserve to be safe. You deserve to wake up every morning without fear or dread or the constant weight of someone else's judgment. That's not too much to ask. That's the bare minimum of what a life should be. And if you're not there yet, if you're still trapped or scared or unsure, know that there are people who believe you, who understand, who are ready to help when you're ready to reach out. You're not alone in this. You never were. I wish I could tell you it gets easy. That one day you wake up and the pain is gone, the anger is resolved, the trust comes back. But healing doesn't work that way. 2 years out, I still have hard days. I still dream about Robert sometimes. I still catch myself checking over my shoulder, waiting for the next betrayal. But I also have good days. Great days even. Days where I paint until my back hurts and I lose track of time. Days where I laugh with Susan over coffee and realize hours have passed. Days where I help another woman find her courage and I see my own strength reflected back at me. The family dinner that started all this feels like it happened to someone else now. That woman who set the recording, who finally stopped pretending. She was braver than she knew, stronger than anyone gave her credit for, and she saved herself. Take care of yourselves out there, and I'll see you in the next story.